Welcome to The Plain Truth, the show where we go into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and the dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Paul, and joining us this week, we have Wahid Azal from Germany. Wahid is an interesting fellow, and I'll let him explain some of what he's done. Wahid, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I've just been basically doing a lot of press work recently with Press TV of Iran, and in my free time working on some writings that I have been meaning to finish up for the last couple of years. Other than that, just chugging along.
Just chugging along. Hey, so how's life in Germany? It's all peaceful, wonderful, and everything, right?
Yeah, I'm very cold right now.
Well, I guess that's to be expected, being Northern Europe and all that. But I guess my thought was more on whether it's politically getting hot there. What do you think?
Well, in Germany itself at the moment, with these refugees, I mean, the German authorities have the situation under control. Despite what the foreign media may be saying, it has, the kind of inconsistent policy coming out of the government itself, though. The government of Merkel has been kind of eroding at her popularity inside the country, but it's nothing to be worried about quite yet, despite what some of the foreign media may be saying.
Well, again, I'm not there. It's hard to say, but it just looks like Europe has got all kinds of serious problems, and that whole refugee question kind of begs the question as to why that happened in the first place. Any thoughts on that?
Well, that needs to be put at the foot of NATO itself. They are primarily the responsible party here, in Turkey specifically, number one. This war has been going on now for 4.5 years plus, and that is the root cause of the refugee crisis, whether we're talking about the refugees coming from Africa or the refugees coming from Syria through Turkey.
Sure, but all this kind of begs the question of what has changed. Turkey doesn't really have the power to impose itself on the EU, does it? So why all the refugees all of a sudden?
Turkey doesn't have that power, but the United States does, who practically controls the EU. This is a distraction and smokescreen kind of thing going on by the real controllers of the EU, in that this war in Syria, is, like we said, it's going into its 4th year, and the resistance to it is such that it doesn't look like it's going to conclude anytime soon, at least to the empire's favor. So as a distraction mechanism, the United States or NATO basically has weaponized these immigrants via Turkey into Europe. And also to weaken particularly Germany, who has been on again, off again, fence sitting on all angles of this conflict since 2011.
Well, I guess the question is which way Germany's going.
That's the question. I mean, the government is putting very contradictory statements. I mean, they sound like they're walking a tightrope, for obvious reasons. But my hunch is that before long, maybe sooner than later, we shall see that at least, if not Merkel herself or any successor that comes after, may begin to distance themselves somewhat from some of these policies of empire. I mean, you don't get the sense of that with these 12,000 troops that the Bundestag, the German parliament, just gave the go-ahead on today. But nevertheless, there's, the BND, the German secret police, or the German version of the FBI, has been leaking relentlessly over the past week against the Saudis as being the responsible party, the main culprits in fueling the conflict over the last 4 years in the Middle East.
Well, yeah, but I mean, some of that is just internal, in America we would say inside baseball kind of stuff. It's not, I mean, which faction deserves more of the blame? Like, can you really blame what's going on in Turkey on Erdogan, right? I mean,
well, Erdogan is Erdogan we've come to learn is a puppet. But the question is, who has the short string of his puppet? My hunch is that we're talking about the Saudis themselves. Even though, technically there's supposed to be a rivalry between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Wahhabis, nevertheless, Erdogan has become the linchpin of Saudi policy over the last 4 years. But the insanity there, it's, I don't know what you call this. You have a Muslim brother state, deep state, official state, whatever you want to call it, that has emerged in Turkey since over the last 14 years with the AKP. They are in cahoots with the Grey Wolves now, officially, who are ultra-nationalist secularists that previous to the rise of the AKP were sworn enemies of the Muslim Brotherhood and all Islamists. And this just gets more and more bizarre because the Grey Wolves and the AKP, Muslim Brother Deep State, are now basically, are the puppeteers of this far Islamist, Salafist principality emirate of ISIS.
But Wahid, that kind of begs another question, and that is, aren't a lot of these players using a mask in terms of what they actually are?
Yeah.
In other words, the Grey Wolves and the AKP could both be Turanist or pan-Turkic, empire, Turkic empire from Turkey to Japan, all of the, like in the 1930s.
Yep.
And so that is something to consider, that one guy says he's secular and another guy says he's a strong religious guy and another guy says he's a Muslim Brotherhood. But, I look at it and I'm not sure that they're all sincere. For one thing, Muslim Brotherhood smells like, a kind of secret society. Yeah. You know what I mean? I find it hard to believe you're actually dedicated to God if your highest goal is some secret society run by men.
Yeah.
And some of these fascist groups, I don't know. Like the Grey Wolves guy, I guess, was involved in the attack on the Pope, whenever it was.
Oh, they were involved in a lot more than that.
A lot more than that. Yeah, of course. But anyway, you get what I'm kind of trying to say here is I wonder, that as you get deeper into the deep state, you don't pull off more layers of onion and you start to say, oh.
Yeah,
so sure. We're getting closer to the top of the pyramid here.
I've brought up NATO several times now. This is Operation Gladio in action.
Right. Sure.
All facets of it. Whether we're talking about ISIS, Al Qaeda, the Grey Wolves, the Turkmens, the AKP and Erdogan, or the Saudis themselves, and not to mention Israel. These are the tentacles of what scholars and others have called for the last 20 years Operation Gladio. And since the base of Gladio's operations was Europe, and Turkey is technically, sort of, between Europe and Asia, it's basically the same thing continuing that was going on during the Cold War.
Yeah, well.
On a much grander scale, albeit.
Sure. But I do think we have to contemplate the overlapping of interests, the NATO-type interests and the interests in Turkey that want a kind of grander, greater, I don't know if you want to say fascistic, but, imperialistic Turkey as being one serious part of the equation. But I tell you what, though, I personally, I get this feeling that Turkey is in a terrible situation and could end up being
economically and politically. Yeah, it is.
Well, it's not just, by politically, I mean internally and externally. I just see like way too many problems and it could easily blow up. And then I think you could add that there may be people who want to blow it up. And
to blow up Turkey itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's possible. I don't know what kind of stability these parties would think they would be bringing to the region and to Europe. If that's what they're trying to do, if that's even their interest to do that.
Order out of chaos, Wahid.
Yeah, of course.
The U.S. blew up Libya, blew up Iraq, has blown up Syria. Why stop when you're on a roll?
Yep, and their ultimate aim is also Iran and then onto China and Russia itself,
Well, I'm just pointing out that if I mean, just if you were a strategist for the for NATO and you said, well, things aren't going our way. Iraq is slipping out of our control. Iran has withstood the storm. Russia is getting stronger. Well, okay, our fallback position, plan B, is just blow it all up. If we can't have it, don't let anybody else have it. Israel will stay strong, and then it'll be a total mess for Iran and Russia. And Europe, by the way, with 10 million refugees.
That may be true, but I mean, let's look at the practicalities. You blow up Turkey. Mm-hmm. The next thing that will happen is that there will be jihadi hordes to quantum factors to the 30,000 that we know about ISIS, and eventually these will start to pour into the borders of Jordan en masse, then eventually Lebanon, and inevitably Israel itself. This is.
I don't know if they're going to get in Israel. I don't see how
they can. They can. If you generate that kind of chaos, you can't control the outcome of it. On that scale, I mean, chaos. See, the thing about the last 4 years since the so-called Arab Spring is that it has been a controlled chaos. At every step of the way, they have stepped in with various plans and various things that they've implemented to control the situation. They brought Morsi to power, then they took him out, put Sisi in. The same thing happened in Libya. They took Gaddafi out, then brought these Islamists in, controlled them in certain areas, and let other groups kind of. There's a check and balance thing that is going on. There's big time social engineering throughout most of these conflicts right now. But something of that, if you break up Turkey, if you blow Turkey apart, you have the Alavis and the Kurds unite against the so-called Turkish center, Sunni center. Europe will be awash in rivers, oceans of blood for the next 20, 30 years. I mean, if people think the refugee crisis and one or two possible Islamists here and there doing this and that is bad, if Turkey blows up, we're looking at the next 50 years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of nothing but that on a quantum level, unless, the agenda also is to blow up Europe itself as well. But then the question is, what does that leave for these controllers? North America only? Australia? I mean, we're talking about mayhem and chaos that is going to last decades, and the violence that it will unleash on the continent itself will be beyond anything that's going on at the moment. So that scenario, if they are really aiming for that, as kind of Plan C.
But Wahid, let me interrupt though. I mean, the United States, just looking at it from a New York point of view, right? Not necessarily Brussels point of view. From a New York point of view, the United States has always benefited tremendously from just about every disaster or war in Europe.
Sure, yeah, of course, yeah.
That's just historical reality. And we get the best, brightest, and a lot of capital and technology from Europe every time somebody or some country blows up. And so, I mean, you just do have to keep that in mind. And anyway, they want to drive a wedge between Europe and Russia. And if all of Eastern Europe and Turkey are basically destabilized, that seems like a good start.
Indeed, but then, eventually you're going to have a stampede of several hundred thousand immigrants wanting to come to North America. Since, they're also generating an anti-immigration narrative, how are they going to explain that one to their constituency when that happens?
I didn't know. Are there elections in the U.S.?
Yeah.
I mean, wow, okay. I didn't realize. I'd forgotten. It's been so long since I thought an election was real or actually happened in the U.S. I kind of forgot.
With the Republican frontrunner proposing, walls around the southern U.S. border and potentially a database for all Muslims in the U.S. and branding all Muslims with an identifier, Mr. Donald Trump. Yeah.
Sure, but I just think that's part of the agenda. that can start with prisoners or whatever, and then it can expand to Muslims or Muslim immigrants or something. But I don't think it's quite that simple. First of all, I wouldn't trust anyone like Trump. But setting that aside, I think that the divide and rule thing is you play both sides against the middle.
Yeah, of course. Right? Yeah.
And so
and that's what the Anglos, whether the British or the Americans, have done that to perfection for the last 100 years. Yeah.
Right. And so you bring in the Muslims, and then you control the Muslim groups, and then at the same time you control the anti-Muslim groups.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's happening.
So I'm not right. So I'm not convinced that 200 or 300,000 Muslims make any difference in the U.S. in the scheme of things. I think
they don't.
The bigger question is the European economy.
Yeah.
And maybe oil and gas. But first of all, I believe there's a lot of oil and gas that's just waiting to be opened up, that various Western companies know about, and it's just an insurance for when the world goes to hell or something.
Sure.
So I suspect that that's one angle, and then I just think the other angle is the U.S. still has the Navy, still has the control of important things like cable systems and satellites, and if there's serious turmoil in the Middle East, I'm not convinced that the U.S. is actually harmed by that relative to all the other players. Particularly when you factor in the U.S. may be losing control anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So if you were looking at it from that point of view, look at the reality on the ground. Iran has survived. Syria is going to win the war. Give or take whatever's left of Syria, that kind of thing. I'm not sure that chaos is such an irrational strategy for the Anglo-American masters.
But that strategy is only as good as you have dollar hegemony. Now, people have cried wolf for the last 5-6 years that the dollar is about to collapse. But the Chinese are, if you look at this, rationally and based on the data, the Chinese are beginning to move in on the U.S. dollar. Now, the dollar's not going to fall tomorrow, but I would say, let's give it a conservative 10, 15 years. Are these controllers looking that far ahead? And the way I look at it, I don't think they are, actually. They're desperate on one level because the Chinese and the Russians are moving into their economic turn. Look, if we take the dictum of von Clausewitz, that war is commerce by other means, with this situation that's unfolded over the last 4 years, that is literally the case. This is about oil. The war in Syria itself, which is the linchpin of all of this, is because of the shale oil interests of Mr. Murdoch and the Rothschild family, whether in the Golan or in the Syrian side of the Mediterranean. Then we have the pipelines issue, and now this, ISIS is growing and getting richer because of the oil that they steal from Mosul and in eastern Syria, that they then sell for dirt cheap to Turkey.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I won't deny that oil and gas are a big part of it. But I do think that geopolitics or geostrategy is kind of at a higher level. And so if you break Syria, you cut off Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Right? And then you smash Hezbollah, and then that leaves Iran weakened. And so that means that Iran will have to agree to become a client state of the West, in which case all the gas and oil in Iran will, fall to Western.
Fall into the hands, into the Western.
Into oil and gas interests will fall into their hands. And so I actually think that power comes, first, and then from that comes all the gas and oil contracts in the world. But for sure, there's no question that it's.
But something must first fuel power. Power needs gas in the tank. It doesn't run on empty. So,
that's true.
These are symbiotic things. We can't really separate one from the other. But
absolutely. But I tell you what, why don't we get into some of the other angles of what's going on? Iran looks like, actually, and Russia too, looks like they're bringing in more and more people, more and more firepower. So how do you see it playing out in terms of the Syrian war?
Well, they're hunkering down and basically reinforcing the government of Syria itself. Now, the issue is how long can this be realistically sustained with the numbers that they're sending in? These are mainly expeditionary forces, and Iran actually has sustained some losses recently in the last 2 months. Several top commanders, IRGC commanders, have been taken out. So, either Iran needs to step up with more troop presence, like Qasem Soleimani promised about 3 months ago, about 15,000 to 20,000 Iranian troops, or someone else, like the Russians, need to step up with more troops.
Well, to the extent we can believe the blogs or the Twitter accounts, both Russia and Iran are indeed stepping up.
Yes, but not to a significant. I mean, they have stepped up, but there needs to be more of a troops presence there. Right now, still these Takfiri groups in eastern Syria are having a run of the place, and also around the borderlands between Turkey and Syria. I mean, you have Nusra, Ahrar al-Sham, ISIS, and then these bloody gray wolves who are dressing up as Islamists whenever it suits them. They're running around. They need to be basically pushed out of Syria completely, and it's just taking too long. These guys should have been out of there a while ago.
Well, the logistics of sending in a huge army, and then getting to some of these locations is not so easy. And then I think you also got to add in that the ISIS controllers have had a long time, years, really, to build fortifications, tunnels, underground command centers, things like that.
Sure, yeah.
And I think
which the Russians, to their credit, are pounding from the air right now.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm just saying that the other thing, though, is I think because Turkey might invade in the north, you've got to basically leave a lot of troops, kind of near the north or whatever to handle that.
Yeah.
And so realistically, you may not like it, but the area in eastern Syria basically had to be a second priority, I would think. And anyway, I mean, Russia had to avoid having their bases overrun. I mean, they didn't have a lot of leeway over there. They had to clean up that area first.
Yeah, in Latakia, they had to reinforce that area.
But again, just looking at Twitter and the commentators from the Middle East, they say that Russia is about to have 4 air bases inside Syria, and that Iran is bringing, I forget the number, but let's say 100 fighter jets or bombers, and that Russia will do the maintenance on them and provide the weapons, but Iranian pilots will do the bombing or something like that. Anyway, granted, until you see it, you can't be sure that it's true. I mean, war, everything is subject to the noble lie, right?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, having said that, I think you can see that both Russia and Iran are stepping up, but maybe not as fast as we would have hoped for or expected. But also look at the logistics from a Russian point of view. How do you get there? You got one little way to get there, and it goes through Turkey. You know what I mean? It's not exactly a comfortable supply chain. The logistics don't look so good. And other places aren't willing to help, like Cyprus wouldn't allow Russia using their bases for bombing.
It's just kind of strange, given the large Russian presence that was on the Greek side of Cyprus for such a long time, with all these Russian oligarchs rumored to be there, and the amount of Russian money that used to be in Cyprus for such a long time.
Well, I think the West knows something, and that is that the way you control a country is you control the top 20 guys, and you have their control files. You have all the blackmail information, and then failing that, you obviously know where their kids are at all times, so that push comes to shove, an accident will happen.
Yep.
Russia has, I think, had way too much faith in the power of business or something. You know what I mean? Like, we buy all this produce from Turkey, so they're going to become our friends or something.
No, it doesn't work like that, especially with the Turks.
I don't think it works that way, but I don't think it works that way anywhere on Earth. I think that, something like fresh fruit is at a totally different level than something like the geostrategy of the country. I don't think you can change.
Although you have to look at the history and the behavior of a given people over the course of time. I mean, the Ottomans were not very well known for being good friends to anybody, even their
True.
allies. You know,
Yeah, that's true, and that's
yeah,
why I think they're panicking too, is because they know they don't actually have any friends.
that's right.
The only friend Turkey has is Azerbaijan, and
Which
Azerbaijan is in a total mess in itself.
which incidentally, it's good that you brought this up. The government of Ilham Aliyev has begun a massive crackdown on 85% of its own population were Shiites.
Mm-hmm.
And this just came out of the blue, just over last fortnight. And as far as I'm concerned, this kind of gives the lie away and finally proves that these so-called Azeri separatists that have been agitating in Iran for such a long time are actually nothing more than puppets of empire. We already knew that. But this crackdown by Aliyev kind of puts another nail into that coffin.
Well, supposedly the prime minister of Turkey, Davutoglu, was in Azerbaijan today or yesterday, and trying to stir things up and show that Turkey has friends and so on and so forth. But you get the feeling that Turkey would like to. So the ostensible reason was to get more gas from Azerbaijan, but as a practical matter, that isn't really anything immediate. So you suspect it's more about trying to cause problems.
Yes, for Iran.
Mostly for Iran, but possibly with Armenia. Because, look, Russia's just putting in a lot of stuff in the Armenian base they have.
And also, Armenia is quite close to Iran. They have very close relations.
Well, anyway, people can look at a map and they'll see that the situation there is borderline unstable to begin with. There's this big area of Azerbaijan that's actually surrounded by Armenia called Nakhichevan. Mm-hmm. And anyway, just look at a map and you'll see that it's easy to start a war there. And Azerbaijan, I think, is in a huge bind because it's basically surrounded by Russia, Iran, Armenia, and Georgia, and that's not Russia can lean on Georgia, and that means that Azerbaijan is basically surrounded by enemies.
That's right.
And Azerbaijan, by the way, has played it in a very aggressive and nasty way the last 15 years, and yes, so it doesn't have any friends, is what I'm trying to say. In other words, Russia doesn't really want to be negative or hostile to Azerbaijan, but
well, it has friends in the form of American special ops and Mossad and Israeli Shin Bet that are rumored to be crawling up and down that Azeri Republic.
Yes, that's true. But on the other hand, Wahid, you know that a lot of those guys are there to overthrow that government because they would want a more suicidal puppet in there than the just plain venal, corrupt, and useless dictatorship they've had for the last 20 years, right? And so, with all apologies,
so attacking 85% of your own Shiite population. I mean.
Well, anyway, that's a mess. But I'm just saying that's another angle to this. It's possible that Russia and Iran will decide to lean on Azerbaijan, and not saying that it's wonderful or moral, but you could argue that Azerbaijan has it coming for their the way they've played their hand the last 20 years. But well, I guess that then you expect Syria to survive this, right?
In the interim, the last time we talked, you asked me, if you thought that the Syrian war was going to start to dissipate, and I said no, I don't see this coming anytime soon. The difference between the last time and now, I see, with the entry of Russia now into this conflict directly, Bashar will survive. But the question is, how long will this war continue? And I cannot see this thing ending, at least within the next year. And like we talked before, this thing has the potential of triggering a much larger war. Or if not a war, then something on the scale of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but a little more hot than the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962.
Well, you know where the Cuban Missile Crisis started?
Yeah, in Turkey. Yeah.
Which raises a lot of questions in my mind, like back in those days, if you had all these ICBMs, what difference does it make if you put some of them in Turkey or Cuba? You know. Anyway, that's a separate topic, but I admit to being a jaded conspiracy theorist. But I will just say that anyway, Turkey is one of those kinds of places. If you're going to look for a place for World War III to start, that might even be a better bet than Israel, believe it or not, because it's got all these in all relations, it's got so many things like the Black Sea, right? Yeah. But it's got and then the historical bad blood with all these different groups.
Yeah.
It's just a place that you can easily see something breaking out, and then if you get either a Turkic fascist deep state or a religious Islamist type deep state, you can see that all kinds of problems could come out of it. So now that Russia's gone in, I actually wonder. Pushkov in Russia, the head of their foreign affairs branch in their parliament, said a day or two ago, he said that it's not about Syria now, it's about the whole Middle East.
Yeah, he's right. But it always has been.
And I think he's right, but I agree. I think that's why it's been so hard to solve. If you could, if it were just like, we give 5 miles of territory to this guy, and we agree that Assad leaves in 6 years, and all the, what I mean, the normal political, bartering, so to speak.
Yeah.
The problem is that it doesn't work because those aren't the real issues.
No.
Right. In other words, the real issue is, in a sense, not really Syria. The real issue is it's about the power structure in all of the Middle East.
And beyond, into Russia, the whole of Eurasia.
And of course, and that goes into Eurasia. It goes into the Suez Canal. It goes into a lot of areas, and that's what's made this thing unsolvable. If you ask me, it's because it isn't. Assad is the least of the issues. In other words, and even. Even I don't know, having isn't Assad's wife a Sunni or something? I don't know, but having a Sunni won't make any difference either. It's the structure of the power there.
Yeah, it's the power structure.
And so that's kind of the issue. Well, how do you see then? You think that it'll drag on, and you don't think it's likely that Turkey will invade, I guess, is your bet.
I think that they've threatened this. In one sense, I think the downing of that Su-24 about 2 weeks ago was the Turks kind of feeling the waters. And given the reaction that Russian has shown, I think they're kind of pulling back on that option. However, if there is a threat to the power structure, the present power structure of Turkey itself, with Erdogan and the deep state, then all bets are off. They would do that very thing, and to basically as a self-survival mechanism.
Do you think somebody might want them to invade Syria?
Of course.
The U.S. or Russia?
Of course, yeah. Of course they want that.
What about Russia?
Would Russia want them to invade Syria? I don't think with the Russians it's a matter of them wanting Turkey to invade Syria, because they're trying to dampen this entire conflict rather than to engage in a hot war with Turkey. But I think the Americans, I think the Anglo-American Empire, is kind of pushing for them, to some degree Israel itself. By the way, I don't know if anybody noticed that about 2 days ago in a press conference, Bibi Netanyahu came out and very explicitly admitted to the fact that Israel has been operating inside Syria for the entirety of this conflict since 2011.
I'm shocked.
It did not make a ripple anywhere. A few places, covered this.
Well, it's not. A free press is great as long as you own one.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, but they've had hospitals for ISIS.
We've all known this. We've known this. The evidence has been out there, but for them to now come and actually admit, you know what? After all, we have been there since 2011. That's
Well, it's
something
pretty
else.
shameless that they can admit it. But anyway, I guess they're shameless, or at least Netanyahu is. Um, well, I don't, I think the Russians have all along wanted, I mean, their strategy, whether it be in Eastern Europe or in Turkey, has been, preferring peace, a bad peace over a good war.
Mhm.
But having said that, I think that as Putin said in one of his recent speeches, where he basically said, growing up on the streets of Leningrad, one of the things he learned was if you're going to be in a fight, strike first.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an element of it that they may decide, at some point, you have to decide, can we work with these guys, or have we crossed the Rubicon to the point where now we have to plot alternatives?
Mm.
And Turkey and Russia may have crossed the point where I don't think business as usual can ever return.
And
Or
this
at least,
while Erdogan is in power, yeah, and the AKP, yeah.
I don't think it's just Erdogan. I don't think the AKP or Davutoglu or I don't see that you can get it. But again, I could be wrong. I know Russia's put great effort into becoming friends with Turkey, but I just question whether that's realistic, particularly in this case, because this war, the longer it's gone on, the more it's hardened everything and made it hard to resolve.
Yeah.
At least from what I read, or, I don't pretend to have family there or something, but, maybe, I mean, a lot of areas have been ethnically cleansed. I mean, once you start having things like people being beheaded or ethnically cleansed or so on, you're a minority somewhere. You're a Christian village, or you're a Kurdish, or you're a Kurd ethnic, or an Alawite, or the Kurds cleanse, or the Turkmen cleanse.
Mm.
You're on the losing end of that. The kind of revenge you want if you survive is, come on. If your wife and kids get killed, what do you think is a fair revenge? The group who did it gets to come back and
do it to yours. Yeah.
Live across town from you? Or is the kind of revenge you want that you go to their village 10 miles away and you do the same to them?
Yeah. That's exactly that. And tit for tat. So we're looking at a couple of generations of trying to unravel that psychosis. And that won't be easy at all.
Actually, I've heard that. I went to a Middle Eastern restaurant in the U.S. once, and was talking to a refugee from Homs, which is one of the areas that had, relatively strong anti-Assad feeling.
Yeah.
And he basically, as soon as he could, he got out, and he got refugee status to the U.S. But he basically said that, the problem from his point of view is that it's not really, let's say Assad wins. Okay, so what? The issue is that the people can't live together anymore. If you've got, and maybe it's the same in the Ukraine, but if you've got like half the family went this way and half went the other, it's just because once the blood gets going, it's just like, it's hard to forgive somebody for killing your kids.
We had this experience in Europe over 20 years ago. This is how the Anglo-American engineers broke up the former Yugoslavia, as well as some of the other Soviet republics.
Yeah, of course.
They did
they're good.
Exactly.
They're good at this. Yeah, they're good at this. But I'm saying that it is going to make it very hard to put Syria back together the way it was. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's likely. I think that a lot of the minority areas are going to have to move and be in a more protected zone, or they'll never come back. And if there's a Kurdish region, that is another issue. And why don't we get into the Kurdish question, because this is such a big deal. What are your thoughts on how that's likely to play out?
Well, right now there's a war by the Turkish state against the PKK, who are ostensibly, the PKK is fighting ISIS, that is supposedly being supported by NATO, but being bombed by Turkey, who is a NATO member. Where's this all going? The Iraqi Kurds have been on the verge of declaring an independent Kurdistan for a while now. But the sentiment in Iraqi Kurdistan is that, they wouldn't do this unless there was some consensus among their brothers in Turkey and in Syria. Mm-hmm. The thing is that there are too many different groups who want to delete this future Kurdistan. And because of the various rivalries between these various groups, they haven't been able to get anywhere. The only thing that has united them, at least in the last 2 years, has been this issue of the Takfiris and ISIS specifically. So, the question is, do they want to see this resolved? And I've read, comments by people, Kurds, who say that, like, for example, some of the Barzani Kurds are not actually interested in seeing the downfall of ISIS, because then that would be the moment of truth for these guys about the future of Kurdistan itself, and that they're quite comfortable with the situation that they find themselves in right now.
Well, Barzani and his clan are, what can we say? There are a lot of reasons to have doubts about them.
Of course.
They certainly seem to be close friends of Israel.
Very
and
close.
Many argue that Barzani, they're actually Jewish. And I don't know about that, but that is widely stated. But set that aside. The question, though, is that they're not that popular, really, even within Iraqi Kurdistan, as near as I can guesstimate. Not knowing the Kurdish language or Arabic, I'm not.
They're not popular, but they have a lot of power, and they have both monetary power and also armed power, and that's what makes the difference.
Yeah, sure, but nonetheless, that's true. But they may have the power in terms of the guns to control the area they're in, but to actually get all the way over to Syria or something with a totally different history, political, it's a different world,
Sure,
and so I don't think they can necessarily export their power. And indeed, Barzani and his clan have had trouble holding on to Iraqi Kurdistan. I mean, I think they're
yes, they have, yeah, because
So
they also have their own rivals, Kurdish rivals, yeah.
So I wouldn't even bet they can hold on to that. But nonetheless, I mean, the Kurdish issue is a huge thing because I think that it's an existential issue for Turkey.
Yes.
And, I wish it shouldn't be, but the history of Turkey.
I mean, this is also a central question to what you were asking before. Israel is on the record saying that they want an independent Kurdistan, okay? But an independent Kurdistan in any form is not possible. I mean, a semi-autonomous Kurdistan exists, but an independent Kurdish state is not possible so long as there is a singular Turkish state. So yes, this is an existential issue for Turkey. The only way that you will get an independent Kurdish state occurring is for the Turkish one to implode. And then that is the road to Kurdish independence.
Yeah, and that's kind of the issue. And that's why, again, I said this issue, the Syrian war seems unsolvable because by escalating this and throwing gasoline and matches all over the place, there are no good solutions now.
No.
I mean, even if you were, I don't know, had the power, you're sitting in the National Security Council in Russia. I mean, at the end of the day, I think your choices are, they're all bad.
Yeah.
You don't really want to blow up Turkey, but I don't see at this point how, would Russia and Iran be willing to fight the Kurds in northern Syria at the end of this? And I doubt it. Right? So I think they are going to give them autonomy. And I think that does put Turkey in a real bind. And then it depends on what Iraqi Kurdistan does.
But it also puts Iran in a bind, you see, because there's also, a huge Kurdish population, Kurdish territory within Iran itself. But this is where this gets really murky now.
Well, maybe you can answer that.
Sure.
Wahid, I've got a question that you can answer because you're originally of Iranian descent, right?
Yeah.
So you can judge this. But I've heard people say that the Kurdish question for Iran is of a far lesser degree of trouble than it is for Iraq, Syria, or Turkey. And the reason for that is that basically Kurds are closer, ethnically, linguistically, or whatever, to Iranians. And they don't have quite the same history of being, gunned down every 20 years.
No.
So what is your take on that?
there has been I mean, historically, the Kurds are Iranians. I mean, there's a lot of dispute in the archaeology about this, but most of the evidence shows that the Kurds are the remnants of the Medes, which were the one of the main two Persian groups in that region about 2,500 years ago. And their language is basically a dialect of Persian. But during the Islamic period, the Kurds have gone into many different directions, and perhaps people are aware of the fact that Saladin, the great anti-crusader, founder of the Ayyubid dynasty, was a Kurd.
Right.
He was the great savior of Islamic hate from the hands of the Western Crusaders. But in the modern period, especially since the British came in there and meddled in the 19th century, this idea of Kurdish independence has been percolating from that time. I mean, if you go back into the historical text and the manuscript traditions, you don't find this Kurdish irredentism until the British show up. And the British seeded this idea as one of their many divide and conquer strategies in the region. During the 20th century, there were periodic problems in Iran with the Kurds. The first major one flared up at the end of the Second World War, when Stalin left sizable divisions of the Red Army in Iran. I mean, the Soviet army had invaded Iran in end of 1941 because it looked like Reza Shah was about to side with Hitler. And once the British and American troops left at the end of 45, the Russians basically refused to leave, and so they set up two autonomous Soviet republics in northern Iran, one in Azerbaijan and the other one in Kurdistan. Truman threatened Stalin with a nuclear strike on Moscow, and that's how he got Stalin to remove these Soviet divisions out of Iran. And the rest of the job was done by the Iranian government, then under the Shah. Then, during the period of the Shah, there was a flare-up, and these were basically different groups that were being funded by the various different people. Some of them were being funded by the USSR. There were the Barzani Kurds. There was some of these other Kurdish groups in Iran, and they were fighting mostly against each other, but also against both the Iraqi and the Iranian governments. And part of the Algiers Accords between Saddam Hussein and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the late Shah of Iran, was to basically, stop the various Kurdish groups that each side of the border was supporting against each other, and to bring that region into normality. Everything was fine until the Iranian Revolution, or the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution, 79-80, when there were, again, drives by certain Kurdish groups in Iranian Kurdistan for independence. Later turned out that some of these groups were actually being funded by the West. Once the Iranian government put these guys down, things came back to normal again. We again had some problems with a group known as Pejak, who were just an outright terrorist organization, and they're completely under the thumb of Israel. And so far, Iran has managed to basically control that situation. The average Kurds in Iran, especially in the major Kurdish cities of Kerman, Sanandaj, for the most part see themselves as Iranians. They may have some problems with the central government, and this is the case also throughout Iran. But by and large, they have less of a problem with the Iranian central government than say, the Kurds of Iraq or the Kurds of Turkey or the Kurds of even Syria. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
Well, but even if the Iranian government might not like Kurdish autonomy or quasi-states or whatever, it may be unavoidable at this point.
At this point, well, that whole depends on the outcome of this conflict in Syria, and if something bigger comes to Turkey itself.
Well, and then also what Russia wants to do.
And then obviously what Russia wants to do, yeah.
I mean, it's possible that, again, Russia may decide that a smaller Turkey is a good idea.
We shall see.
That would be risky, of course, and they would never say it.
Very
it'd be risky. It'd never be stated. There would never be a document anybody would ever find. that would say anything remotely like that. But Hatay, Armenia, Kurdistan, Northern Cyprus, Constantinople. I can think of a few places where Turkey could get a lot smaller. And,
well, I mean, we have. Here's the thing. We have been seeing videos and various statements by some what one would classify as far right Russian groups. These are the fascists in Russia who are outright claiming that Russia should go and retake Constantinople again. But these are very risky, and doing these sorts of things, conflicts that are generated from that direction, always end up at your own doorstep eventually. And Constantinople hasn't been in the hands of Christendom for the last almost 700 years now.
Yeah, I know. And I read, because I read a lot of Russian blogs and news and whatever, and they regularly show all the various Christian prophecies and even a few Islamic ones regarding Constantinople, returning to its old home. And I'm not remotely into all that. I'm just saying I certainly have read a number of them.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Look, anyway, that wouldn't even really be the target. The target would be that if you can't control the Kurdish situation, and if you're going to have governments like Erdogan and Davutoglu, what should be a rational strategy for Russia or Iran. And if you have to agree to Kurdish autonomy in Syria.
Sure, the only rational strategy from Russia and Iran is a tangible form of de-escalation of the entire conflict. This is what at least this is what both sides are saying. America pays lip service to this, but we know they don't mean what they say. And the only logical explanation, for at least the initial thinking on the part of Russia for going there in September was that very thing. But as we're beginning to witness now, that this thing is also taking on a life of its own and escalating on a much more global scale, potentially.
Well, I think a lot of people would argue Russia coming in there and every week bringing in more and more firepower and cruise missiles and things like that. I think a lot of people would say that Russia has been escalating things. Depends on how you look at it. But,
well, it depends how you look at it. But I think I think Russia's involvement was the best thing that happened in the last 4 years. It's good that they got involved. And it has brought a lot of things forward that 4 years ago I was being accused of being a conspiracy theorist for saying so, but now everybody and their dog knows that that this is all a big theater. When Russia puts forth evidence, concrete evidence, satellite evidence, showing that these ISIS Takfiris are selling Mosul and Syrian oil to Turkey and are being protected by Turkey and having tankers provided by Turkey and then having this crude oil pumped into refineries in Turkey itself, and then for the United States and its allies coming in nonchalantly without any counter evidence of their own, just dismissing all of this, and then immediately on the very day that this info dump is happening, we have this shooting flare up in San Bernardino, California. Come on,
Well, I saw that the suspect had some name like Erdogan. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Seriously, Tayyip. But of course, I personally, being a conspiracy theorist, I think that a lot of these, like that San Bernardino one, are basically drills where they pretend that they're real, and that one wasn't a real one. I know there are some that are real. They bother to kill people, but I think there's something like 4 or 5 times as many of those per year as there were, let's say 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And I think there's an agenda to promote mental health screening and
Sure.
various other bad things like fear and gun control, and you know the story.
Yeah.
But it also is a big distraction. And so whenever something important happens that they don't want people to focus on, then there's one of these supposed events, or sometimes real events, where something happens, and then the entire media, narrative in the U.S. goes away from it.
Yeah.
And some of that, I mean, some people even argue.
Very, very convenient on the very day that Russia was doing this info dump against Turkey. All of a sudden we have this happen.
Yeah, and there's some success for Russia, or for that matter, Iran. You can bet there will be some internal thing in the U.S. that drives the news in that direction. It's practically a given. It's happened so often now that So for sure, there's that angle to it. Well, I think that Russia, and for that matter, Iran, want de-escalation, but look, I just see it as an unavoidable struggle. The Anglo-American people have to get control of Russia and China, so it's just a question of how they do it, or fail to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so one possibility is they. By the way, when you talk about, or I talk about a Turkish invasion, it's entirely likely that if they did that, they would do other things at the same time, like start the war in the Ukraine, right? Or terrorism in Crimea, stuff like that.
Or attack Iran.
Yeah, that's even possible, although now we're even more stretching it. But it depends on how much control they think they have of the chaos.
No, I wouldn't say it's that much of a stretch. For the last 2 months, I've been watching as these various NED so-called human rights groups based out of the Beltway, like groups like United for Iran and the National Iranian American Council, etc., and all these various spin-offs, have been relentlessly pushing this human rights narrative again on Iran.
Wow. Those degenerates, that
sort of went away for a while, and then now it's come back with a vengeance again.
Well, the funding got renewed.
Yeah.
I mean that's their job, and they're a dog that has to justify his pet food. Yeah. I don't know. It certainly could happen, but the bigger idea is that if Turkey did do it, it would probably be in some kind of planned way with other things, because Russia is getting closer to being overextended. Syria logistically is hard to deal with, and the Ukraine has got them tied down a bit. But I think they might want to add one more.
They might do something in the Baltic.
Central Asia or the Baltics are the places that come to mind. The Baltics are awfully close to St. Petersburg,
Yeah.
Even just a suicidal, supposed accidental thing, you know what I mean. They can gin up bogus events very easily, right? A naval ship accidentally does something it shouldn't, and it's going to scare the hell out of Russia. And so now their leadership is going to, and military are going to be looking at three things at the same time or whatever. So I think there's a good chance that you got to, anyway, I think you got to factor that in. The Ukraine, the coup government, needs, how can I say it, to justify its existence. It's an ugly system, right? And they might want to restart the war. I know it doesn't really make sense in a certain way of looking at it, but they're puppets,
Yeah.
Right? And Erdogan, and you argued he's a puppet, but in any case, they're cornered rats.
Yeah.
Right? And you show them that on these three walls we got electricity coming at you. They're going to run to the open side.
That's right.
Right. So I don't think you can rule it out. I'm not. I know Russia and Iran would, generally speaking, like to de-escalate things because they both want to focus on business development.
That's right. Yeah.
And actually, I respect that. They both want to make their countries more prosperous and so on and so forth. And that's what really it should be. But I just don't know that it's going to. I don't know. There's a famous quote from the I guess it was the prime minister. Anyway, the minister under the Tsar that Putin likes a lot, Stolypin. Mm-hmm. Give Russia 20 years of peace and no one will recognize her, or something like that. right? If we could just have peace for 20 years, we could just totally reform. He was a big reformer. And he was assassinated in Kiev, so that's kind of appropriate. It helped to lead to the fall of the czars and going into World War I and all that. But I guess that's my point, though, is that the Western strategy is that you can't give Russia 20 years of peace, right? Just speaking about just, cold calculations, it's got this huge border. And it's easy because there are so many ethnic and religious and other disputes that you can gin up. So go for it. And the borders are wrong, too, in a lot of places. And some of that's the Soviets' responsibility, but some of it's the British or the French, like with the Kurds. Yeah. I mean, is there any real solution to that problem? You know what I mean? And that was before the Syrian war. You know what I mean? But now it just looks totally hopeless. I mean, all the solutions I think are just somebody loses, and so it's never really in anybody's best interest to quit. Got a question for you. You said you thought that Erdogan and the AKP were largely under Saudi influence, and typically when you read the blogs and stuff, they talk about Qatari bribes and Qatari money.
Well, the Qataris are officially the Muslim Brothers supporting, but Saudi Arabia has also pumped quite a substantial amount of cash into Turkey, and into at least the AKP's coffers for the last 10 years.
Okay. So at the end of the day, the Muslim Brotherhood Wahhabi feud is somewhat bogus or somewhat under control.
Of course.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I never really thought it was real. Okay. Well, what about, you talked about de-escalation, but what about hugely military responses like helping the Houthis in Yemen? It looks like the Saudis are getting their butts kicked more or less and may lose parts of southern Saudi Arabia. Just in the last couple of days, I mean, 3 or 4 bases fell.
Yeah, this has been happening. Actually, it's not just the past 3-4 days. This has been consistent over the last almost 6 months now. On the ground.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And it's funny watching the YouTubes if they're legit. I mean, you see like Houthi tribesmen, barefoot, right? And they go to tanks, and I guess they don't know how to use them, so they just blow them up, kind of thing. It's kind of
It just tells you the caliber of the Saudis themselves. I mean, they have all this expensive weaponry that they don't actually know how to operate correctly. But yeah, I mean,
of course, because the officer class is going to be due to their rank, right? Yeah. In terms of birth, right? Are you a prince or not, right? Mm-hmm. And you have a non-merit-based society. In a non-modern society, I mean, how are you going to train people to use tanks? I mean, it's going to be a difficult challenge for them. And so they hire some Colombians or whatever. But, anyway, okay. But let's get back to the point. The point is, many would argue that Russia or Iran could supply the Houthis with weapons or, other things, and therefore cause the Saudis a tremendous amount of pain. Do you think that's happening now, or do you think it's going to happen in the future? Yeah, well, I'm asking your opinion. Yeah. What do you think?
That's the accusation. I mean, Iran has denied it. They haven't actually made that accusation to the Russians yet. Officially, Iran has denied it, but I cannot see how Iran is not helping on some level, even if it's a logistical one, or an advisory one to these Houthis. Particularly given the fact, guerrilla wars today are not the same as guerrilla wars during Vietnam. There's sophisticated satellite technology now that can basically pinpoint, a rat hiding inside the crevice of a cave in deep in a mountain. So it's not that easy to conduct a guerrilla war anymore. My conclusion is that even though Iran is denying it, I think there must be some level of coordination coming from Tehran, even if it is 1 or 2 advisors in Sana'a or wherever that are helping. That must be happening on some level. That's my thinking.
Well, also, you read reports of the Houthis using weapons and getting a kill, like destroying an air base, long distance away, like 50 kilometers away or 30 kilometers away or something. I wonder whether the Houthi, tribesmen who are barefooted and, walking over there are actually experienced enough with some of this fairly sophisticated weaponry.
That is the question. But that kind of weaponry would also come from Russia. It wouldn't come from Iran.
Yeah, that's my question too, is because, and hitting ships, I mean, you see them hit ships, and you sit there and say, are you really able to do, look, I mean, no offense to the, less developed.
To the Houthis. No, the answer
I
is
respect them, and they got a lot more spunk than the average person in Europe these days.
Sure.
So I'm not, I'm not downplaying them. I'm just saying that some of this stuff is sophisticated, technically driven weaponry where you need training, practice, and so on. And they seem to be getting fairly good kill ratios out of all this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, wiping out an airbase with 100 jets, things like that. I mean, that's just, I find it hard to believe that they're, in addition to Iranian, I suspect there are Russians there. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, considering that Russia did nothing at the Security Council to stop the Saudi air war, I hate to say it, but it's the least they can do now. If that is going on, and if there is a Russian presence, I sure hope they're there,
Well, maybe they wanted to give the Saudis a present. Let them.
Saudis deserves quite a few of those presents, actually.
Give them everything they want, and they want a suicidal war, and they got it. And also, I don't know. I think the situation in Yemen is so murky in the first place. I don't know what Russia should have done. But in any case, it looks like the Saudis are at risk of losing a fair bit of southern Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And that raises all kinds of questions. And, I should point out, assuming it's true, I don't know, but I've read in different places that something like upwards of a third of Saudi tribes trace their ancestry to Yemen. And
that's true. Yeah,
there's large overlap. And it's not just ancient stuff. Some of it's current. You know what I mean? Some of the tribes overlap. So losing southern Saudi Arabia is not actually so shocking because some of the invaders and some of the locals are of the same tribe. And that's a part of the world where tribes mean more than, they do in the West or something.
Sure. I mean, on that note, the Bin Laden family are Yemeni originally.
Yeah, sure. They're from Yemen.
Yeah.
And so that shows you the tight relationship between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And it also shows the insanity. And so that's a question. Do you think that the Saudis have gone insane?
The Saudis have always been insane. The House of Saud has been insane from the moment they took power. I mean, if people look at the atrocities of ISIS, all they need to do is go back to the 1920s when the British empowered these people to take over the peninsula and see the kind of mayhem they unleashed once they did. But that is the nature of the Saudi state. They are desperate right now because internally their support has been waning progressively. Whether you're talking from the Shia is one part of the equation, but internally amongst even their own Sunni constituency, they have lost a lot of support. There have been calls upwards of the last 20 years for reform of the kingdom, to bring in universal suffrage, etc. And as long as the House of Saud controls the situation, that doesn't look like it's going to happen. So, these wars, at least the war with Yemen, is kind of a distraction element on the part of the Saudi establishment with its own population.
Some analysts like Thierry Meyssan, the French political figure who's been in Damascus the last few years, he argues that there's a good chance that Saudi Arabia is going to break up three parts and the clans, and that it's visibly falling apart. And I don't know, but if it does, I would imagine it would make it hard for them to continue the war on their end. But I don't think that would stop it because I think the other players, are so powerful that it's not simply a matter of bribing a few people here and there.
is not sustainable. They will not be able to hold on for power, I don't think, for another 10, 15 years. And, since we already know that the Saudi oil is running out, and by 2030, it's already hit peak oil a while ago. What happens after 2030 when there is no oil anymore? Then the raison d'etre of the Saudi, the Saudi establishment ceases to exist. But I think we will see these guys go way before that, hopefully soon.
Well, I'm going to get back to that Russian parliamentarian. I think that this is kind of for the whole enchilada. So, if things go the wrong way for them, and Syria, Iran, Russia win, then I think that means, big changes for the losers, whether you're talking Lebanon or, Lebanon's its own little case, but you know what I mean, the losing factions or losing countries, Turkey, Qatar.
But check this out.
The geopolitics would change. Go ahead.
Yeah, the geopolitics will change, but the Zionists are smart here. And,
they're always smart, Wahid.
And they have been putting feelers out to Russia and Iran, I hear. There's a gentleman on my Facebook that's actually appeared on Iran Press TV a few times, and he writes a magazine of his own. He's based out of Donbass, but he's an Israeli. And he's been telling me for the last 2 months that there's a significant portion of the Israeli establishment that want to switch from the Atlantic bloc to the Eurasian one. And this just blows my mind, that the Israelis kind of feel which way the wind is blowing here, and they're about to jump ship from the American one. And if that is the case, then I think we can expect pretty shortly, at least the thinking in Tel Aviv is that there is going to be an Iranian and Russian win on this.
That's what I would bet.
Yeah.
It looks to me like it's the way to bet.
But this means that basically Israel is wanting to ally with Hezbollah and Iran. I mean, even putting that into a sentence is insane. But if this is the survival instinct of the Zionist establishment, then I don't know what to say.
Well, how can you put it? Certain things in the world are, I don't know if you're going to say above right and wrong.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm trying to say? Like, for example, the Cold War was something that people fought and died over. But on the other hand, it was a construct.
Yes.
It was a convenient system that both sides profited from. And you know what I'm trying to say is that there's kind of this element that certain things are fake. I mean, I hate to put it quite that way, but, are the Israelis anti-Russian or are they pro-Russian? Or is that a silly question? They're just after themselves.
Well, I think on one level it is a silly question because you have a substantial Russian Jewish population in Israel.
Yeah, and you also have that supposedly half of them are not even Jewish, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and supposedly half of them are not even Jewish. So there are historical connections between a lot of the Ashkenazi Jews and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But then the issue of survival is also relevant. If Israel was completely dogged in its support of the West, and let's say the American Empire and the Atlantic Empire goes down, where does that leave Israel? You suddenly are faced with a power like Russia, who also has a nuclear arsenal of its own. I mean, Israel has been able to get away with the fact that they have a nuclear arsenal to scare a lot of its neighbors, but with Russia, they can't get away. They can't play that game with Russia. So, if you're a pragmatist within that establishment, then you're basically thinking about the future. But that ultimately means that they're going to all parties, including the Russians, are going to throw the Palestinians under the bus in that scenario.
Palestinian question is a whole nother long one, along with the Egyptian question. These are really messy. Oh, by the way, just as an aside, I've seen reports that the Arab media are saying that the the Russian plane that was blown up over the Sinai had it stopped before Egypt was Turkey, and that various Egyptian officials and all are saying they think the bomb got on in Turkey. And I don't know that that's true, or that's just a convenient, case of looking for a bad guy to take the fall.
Sure, but how come Egyptian security didn't detect it then? Once the plane
I'm just saying that you get this feeling that, and Russia is posturing in such a way that they want to put all the blame on Erdogan or the AKP. And obviously this whole war in Syria is way, way, way above the AKP. But, they want to leave a politically simple way for everyone to get out.
Yeah.
Right? Throw Turkey under the bus. Throw Erdogan under the bus. And, that may be clever. That may be wise. And I'm not saying I blame them, but I would just point out that the result may be the implosion of Turkey. Because they would know better. We don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But here's the thing. I went to Turkey a year ago, checking it out. I thought it was a fascinating place, but I just see that they have tremendous internal problems.
They do.
Whether you're talking the secular versus religious, whether you're talking and then within religion, you've got all the varieties, right?
Yeah, the Alawites, the Alevis, and the various different Sunnis, and the Sufis versus the Orthodox Sunnis. It's.
And it's funny. One of our shows, we talked a fair bit about the esoteric stuff, and Konya, of course, is the land of Rumi.
Yes.
And I went there, and so here's your Rumi, but that town itself is a AKP, Islamist stronghold.
Yeah.
Right. And so, anyway, they've got serious trouble, and then you've got the Kurdish question, which could just totally destroy the country right there. And in addition to that, I think that I don't pretend to know, but I get the feeling that a large percentage of people in Turkey are, for lack of a better word, crypto something. They're Georgian, or they're Jewish, or they're Armenian, whatever. There are a lot of different, Greeks or whatever, and a lot of them had to change their names or whatever to be, because it's been this really strong Turkish nationalism for the last 100 years. And, that's not a happy situation. And then I just feel it's palpable that they have all these, like the deep state, which a term, that I think was coined to discuss Turkey.
Yes, it was.
I think that's where that term came from.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
And within that deep state, I just feel like he had all these deep networks there, whether they're Turkic fascist or Ottoman, types, or whether they're religious or whatever, Muslim Brotherhood. I don't know, but I just got this. It just seemed very visible that there are all these threads and tensions that are ready to break. And then anger all your neighbors, get involved in a long and bloody war, and then lose the war. It just doesn't sound like a stable environment to me. And with all apologies to Turks, I just feel sorry. The situation looks very, very tense to me. At least it did a year ago when I was there, and I imagine it's, if anything, worse today. So, you got to add that into the equation too. Anyway, okay. So we talked about the Kurds and Yemen. What are anything else that we haven't talked regarding that you'd like to bring up in that general vicinity, current situation?
We pretty much covered quite a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have. Let's see if there's anything else. I didn't really get a clear answer on whether you thought. I mean, you expect Russia and Iran to win, right?
Yes. In the long haul, yeah, I think they will.
In the long haul, but it might take a year or something like that. It may not be easy. So you don't think there will be a Sunni Islamic state of any form there?
What about there is a Sunni Islamic state right now in this Salafist Principality of ISIS?
Yeah, but I mean, do you think that'll be wiped out over time?
Yes.
A year or two, whatever. Yeah. What about Iraq? Do you think that it'll get wiped out there?
Well, I mean, that the Kurdish question is kind of dependent on that. What's interesting about Iraq, despite what some of the propaganda that was coming out last year about Iraq, A lot of these Sunni tribesmen have actually begun abandoning ISIS and these various other Takfiri groups and are now realigning themselves with the Iraqi central government, especially since some of these Ba'athist generals that were operating with ISIS got killed earlier this year.
Oh, hey, so I've kind of got a question about all this then. Where does this leave? I don't know how you want to put it, but if gradually over time they win, and the Syrian national government and the Iraqi national government kind of win and get control, do you think that American influence in Iraq will be driven out?
Yes. Especially the evidence for that is in some of the statements that have been coming out of the Prime Minister's office. This is just remember, this is the guy that replaced al-Maliki because America was calling Maliki an Iranian puppet. This guy himself has been putting some serious, explicit feelers to Russia. And, this tells me that the sentiment within even, individuals that Washington at one point thought were theirs is that they want the Yanks out of there.
Well, then we get back to that point that the Russian parliamentarian is making, that it's really about the whole Middle East here.
Yes, it is.
It's all or nothing.
Yeah.
And then that would explain why Israel would want to become friends with Russia.
Yes.
If you figure it's a 55% chance or 60% chance or whatever that Russia's going to end up calling the shots there, then you want to be friends. Makes perfect sense. I mean,
now I have a question. Since you have a much better gauge of Russia internally, what is the thinking of Russians themselves about the Palestinian issue? If we get this transpiring that suddenly Israel shifts over to the Russian camp, to the Eurasian camp, what does the average Russian think about the Palestinian issue?
Well, that topic has not been discussed much in things I see over the last 2 or 3 years because of all the problems with the West in the Ukraine and Syria and, Turkey and Iran and so on, right? Yeah. So the Palestinian question has been much more like, oh, something happened, like the Israelis are destroying the Gaza Strip again or something, right? It hasn't been as much the moral side of it or the policy side. It's more like, it's happening. just a discussion of it like that. I don't know. I think probably the Russians are kind of confused because it seems like a lot of the Palestinians are bought off, and even, for example, in this war against Syria, even though the Palestinians were treated nicely by the Syrians and given, as refugees and so on and so forth, a lot of them are fighting against Syria. They're paid.
Yes.
And then you read all these reports of Hamas. Well, anyway, you know the story. The Palestinian leadership has been particularly terrible over the last 30 years.
Yeah.
If they get a good offer, they'll turn it down because they personally will make more money by turning it down, or they're bribed by somebody, right? And so I think the general feeling in the Russian news that I see, and again, I'm not Russian, but just based on what I see, is a very the Palestinians have been unlucky. They've had terrible leadership. And no matter how much bravery you show, your hospital getting bombed or white phosphorus or whatever, at the end of the day, you need to have groups, right? And these groups need to have organized, good leaders. And it looks like the Palestinians haven't had any decent leadership for 30 years.
No, they haven't.
And so I think that's kind of another sub thing is they just feel like, who is there that you can work with? I mean, it's all, so I would say it's just a depressing black hole in a sense. But on the other hand, I think as far as the Israeli side, they feel that Israel can be pressured to make deals. And that at the end of the day, Israel has to look at a relative decline in the value of its friendship with something like the U.S.
Yes.
Okay, so if they're thinking about the future, they realize they need new friends, right? And, in a sense, the closer the better, right?
Yes.
And now they may do trickery, right? Like Tsipras of Greece just went there, and he's all sucking up to them. And, they can do that. They can get their agents in places of power in the West, or they can, do different things, bribe or blackmail or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think they need, more of a basis for everything. And so I actually think they really would be wise to try to become friends with Russia. And if there's a lot of gas offshore, that's a real angle to play. And even in the Golan Heights, I don't know, split it. I'm just throwing that out randomly, but I'm just trying to say that if Russia and Iran are going to win, Russia can act as a kind of an honest broker for Israel. And I think they could trust Putin, and I actually think with their otherwise influence, the oligarchs in Russia, they've got enough influence that they probably feel they can trust Russia. And sure, it's not as good as what they got with the U.S., but I'm just saying an honest broker who doesn't want you smashed, and then plus they got all those nukes and everything, right? I mean, it's a deal they could live with. And Syria is going to be like on her knees for a while, right?
Yeah.
And Egypt is all messed up. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is who can threaten Israel at this point?
Well, Iran was kind of stepping up to that, but I don't think even Iran is interested in anymore in doing that.
Iran wants to be.
Yeah.
They just want to develop. I don't think they.
Yeah.
I don't even think originally they were that much against it. But you were the one who could comment on this. But
Sure.
But before we close,
Sure.
How do you see the economic developments in that part of the world? Do you think once we talked and you were very concerned that the West is going to be able to buy its way into power in Iran?
They're still trying that. They're trying that as we speak. They're not getting anywhere right now because a certain segment of the population and the establishment are pretty vigilant in that regard. But the West is trying.
Well, you can rest assured that there's no rest for the weary. They've got to corrupt everybody. But what about just on economic development terms? Do you think Iran is making progress these days, or
Iran is beginning to make progress. The Iranian market hasn't moved very much though, which is kind of strange. But these sanctions are not gradually all being lifted, but the Iranian market is still kind of jittery. But that may change. I think in the next 10 years, assuming that there won't be any more wars and this will all de-escalate, there's a lot of development to be made. And, there are Iranian companies that will obviously be making bids, in Syria or elsewhere, even in Yemen. And so hopefully, once this does de-escalate, this will be where the money comes in.
There's another angle. Iran has done very little business with Russia. And there's a tremendous potential. Russia may be moving away from Turkey.
Yes.
And some of that, even just agriculture,
will come from Iran.
Can come from Iran.
Yeah.
And, it's now, well, just speculation. But I think if I were a Russian, big shot, I would investigate switching over from Turkey into Iran. I would think that there's just all kinds of money to be made. Any thoughts on that, Wahid?
Well, sure. There's quite a lot of trade, bilateral trade between Russia and Iran that will make money for both parties, not just Iran, but also Russia. And that's a very positive direction. And also, Iran needs to push ahead and for full SCO BRICS membership. I think this is the next move on the part of Iran. It really needs to.
After the war's over, Wahid, it'll happen, assuming that the war is a reasonably, decent result, I think it'll happen. It's just too much. It's too necessary for Russia. Russia's got to see Iran's economy get better.
Yes.
So I think, anyway, what can we say? We'll see how it plays out. But the gods of war are still in play here. And, it isn't over yet. And, I got one last question before. Sorry.
Sure.
One last question. So we see countries like France trying to pretend that they want to be good guys in Syria or something.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Has France all of a sudden?
The French is the good guys in Syria. The old colonial master is suddenly the good guy. Oh, come on.
Yeah. So what do you think they're doing?
They're bombing empty buildings and open fields. That's what they've been doing since the Paris attacks. They haven't done anything.
But that's not what I'm saying. What do you think France is pretending to do or trying to do, and what do you think Russia is pretending to do?
It's trying to placate its own population, trying to show itself as strong to more of an internal constituency, and, trying to posture to Russia as well. But, this is a joke, really.
Okay, so Russia's trying to just build this, like, we are the world constituency for fighting terror.
Yeah.
Right? And then France is trying to pretend that instead of losing the war, they're going to be a winner in the war.
Yes.
Once ISIS gets crushed. Okay, well, that makes perfect sense, but I just don't trust these SOBs.
The French.
Should. Well, all of them. The British just voted to.
The British. These guys can
look. All of these guys putting their fighter jets or aircraft carriers or whatever in that part of the world. At minimum, it can all interfere with Russia. Now they got to spend a lot of time figuring out the logistics and the threats of an attack, right?
While the French are a joke, I would say with the British have the British president is far more sinister. This is a spoiler factor here with the Russian strategy, and that's the one to be wary of. But the French are a joke.
Yeah. Well. And I think the British are also at a much higher level in terms of perfidious talent or something like that. They can really, they know how to double, triple cross. Let's just put it that way. They could make some promises that somebody would fall, like Erdogan, and really set it up well. And, and then anyway, and people end up being the in traditional British imperial thinking, the continental dagger, right? People end up being the army, the sucker for the strategists in Britain. It's happened more than a few times. And so that, anyway, but at minimum, it makes Russia have to do a lot of worrying and calculating.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an extra angle there. Well, anyway, Wahid, we've had you for quite a while. We appreciate your thoughts. And
thank you very much.
Okay, all the best for you. And that's it, folks. It's a wrap. Till next time.